Welcome, viewers. I'm Janet Bridgers, founder and director of Earth Alert. Welcome to Heroes of the Coast. This is the program that brings you the personal stories of those who have dedicated their lives to protecting the California coast for all of us. And we're here today with Steve Hoye from Access for All. Steve, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to back up, first of all, for our viewers who may not know some of the background on coastal issues that we're very familiar with. The year was 1972 when voters in the state of California passed the initiative, Proposition 20, that created the California Coastal Act and the California Coastal Commission. Now, what were you doing in 1972?
In 1972, I was actually at drama school in London. I was an actor in London and in England for 20 years. Really? I had no interest in the coast, no interest in California. I've never even been here, actually. But, you know, gradually my path wove its way around, and I ended up in Malibu in 1992. And I read the Coastal Act, and I said, wow, that is really something. I love the California coast. I come from New England, and we had a house on Cape Cod, not on the beach. But when I actually tried to get to the beach in Malibu, I actually found that, you know, it was far more difficult than even Cape Cod. And that's actually what pushed me onto my path, trying to actually allow the public to access one of its most beautiful resources, and that's the coast.
Mm-hmm. And tell us, again, for the background of the viewers, the initial suit with David Geffen, the initial permits that Geffen filed to develop his property in Malibu, when was that?
Well, Mr. Geffen actually made 3 actual offers to actually acquire permits, 1983, 1991, and year 2000. And each of those permits had a chunk of land, in terms of an easement, offered to dedicate, which meant that within a 21-year span of that particular offer, the city of Malibu or a local authority or somebody else like a nonprofit association could assume that offer and open up these particular easements to allow the public to get access. Now, Mr. Geffen lives on Carbon Beach. Billionaire's Beach is the euphemism, but at the same time it's a beautiful stretch of beach, about 2 miles long, and you can actually stand on that beach, or you could, on July 4th, and there would be no one there. I mean, there would be absolutely no one there, because even the people that live there don't really live there. This is their second homes, and basically you can see the servants occasionally walking the dogs, but that's just about it. I do exaggerate. There are people that actually are there, and quite frankly, I just wanted the public to be able to get there, because in the 2 areas that the city of Malibu actually funnels the public into, that's Surfrider Beach and Zuma Beach, and those 2 areas basically are pretty crowded and overstretched.
Right.
Malibu has 27 miles of beach, and we just love to see the public actually accessing all of it, or as much of it as they possibly can.
Now, I'm going to fast forward real quick and then go back. Again, now you have been involved in this epic battle, really epic battle with David Geffen to open access to the beach by his property. And so he, as part of his development permits for, you know, well, the Coastal Act that was passed in '72 made it establish that the public has the right to access the beach. And as our friend Ellen said, you shouldn't have to do that with a rowboat. So he granted, at that time, with those initial permits, access to the beach through his property in exchange for permission to do the development that he wished to do, right?
Yes.
Okay, now what happened after that?
Well, the local authority should have been the actual repository for those offers being accepted. They should have accepted those offers and gently opened them up to the public. That happens in every other constituency in the state of California, except for the county of Mendocino, where we also have a lot of wealthy homeowners who do not like to see the public coming to the beach. And there are organizations just like mine, the Redwood Lands Conservancy, the Mendocino Land Trust, that are actually operating, opening up easements easements there because the local authority abrogates its responsibility to serve the public, as it really should do. If you take 27 miles of the best beach in Southern California, I believe you have an obligation to the public to actually fulfill the ability of the public to access the beach.
Which is, as we've just said, also part of the state law.
Right. It is. It's part of the California Constitution. It's part of the Magna Carta. It's part of Justinian's law in Rome.
Really?
And it's certainly part of the Coastal Act. The term is maximize public access.
Maximize.
Absolutely. There is, you can't have enough. I've never seen an accessway I didn't like. And what Mr. Geffen did was basically make these offers and just assumed no one would pick them up because the city of Malibu doesn't like this role. So I went to the Coastal Commission and the Coastal Conservancy, the two arbiters of this particular decision, and I put forward to them a management plan to open up this site, which would include signage, which would include hours of opening, which would include the ability to police that in terms of litter. And I was granted those. So we assumed those on January 17th, 2002, and told Mr. Geffen. And basically what happened is a few months later, after we had discussions with them at DreamWorks, they sued us. They
sued you?
They did indeed, yeah.
They started it?
Well, yes, they did. What happened really was that they put a list of
You weren't being contentious in the process that you had gone through, right?
No.
You were just simply applying.
We sat down and tried to talk to them about what they felt were going to be problems, address their fears, solve those problems, and when we solved them, every single one, they sued us.
Really?
Because their
problems... Were you floored?
No, I was kind of expecting it actually, because it's not really about little problems like parking and restrooms and public safety and those things. It's all about privilege. It's all about taking the public's property and making it into de facto your own, which is really what happens in Malibu. The city of Malibu actually lined up with Mr. Geffen, and that was surprising to me because, quite frankly, I felt I was doing the city's job. The city didn't actually want to open up access to this inaccessible beach. It should be remembered that down coast of our current accessway, you can't get to the beach for 4.5 miles in Malibu. Up coast, there is an accessway a mile, but you can't get past that at high tide or even basically from mean high tide. So it's very tough to get to this beach.
So in that whole stretch that we think of as Malibu, there are 3 access points?
No, there are actually 10, but they're clustered. There are 5 of them on Malibu Road, and there are a couple up on Broad Beach. There's one at Escondido. There's one at Zonker Harris, which is right next to the pier. But there are large chunks of Malibu that you simply can't get to.
Okay, so now as an actor, were you frightened that, you know, that having somebody as powerful as Geffen on your case was going to impact your career?
What career? I mean, you don't mess with DreamWorks and walk away. No, quite frankly, I haven't been an actor. Actually, I've never been an actor in the United States. I was only an actor in England. I became a fundraiser for the Labour Party. I used to take people to lunch and ask them for 2,000 pounds for the Labour Party. And when I came to the U.S., I actually got a job as the Director of Development for the Sierra Club in Los Angeles.
Okay, there's plenty of fundraising jobs.
Yeah. Sure. And I actually tried to get Sierra Club to take a lot of these easements that were on offer at that time. And Carl Pope, the executive director, was extremely interested. But when we took it to the board of the Sierra Club Foundation, they declined.
Really?
Yes, they felt it would be a legal morass, which it has proved to be. And I couldn't find anybody else to do it, so I set up a 501c3 nonprofit organization and did it myself.
Now, what have been the milestones in this?
Well, every OTD is a milestone.
Offer to dedicate.
Absolutely. Every offer to dedicate and the acceptance of those is a milestone for us. We hold 22, and they're all in Los Angeles County, and we have, except for one, which is in San Diego. There are 2 types. There are the lateral, which are along the beach, and there are the vertical, the very valuable verticals, which go directly from the main public road to the water. And we hold 5 of those, and we're currently trying to open 3 of them. 2 of them are in litigation at this moment in time, and Mr. Geffen still isn't actually settled at this moment in time. We're still actually trying to find a resolution to that crisis.
How has it felt to have this whole epic drama played out in the comic strips? And how did Gary Trudeau, Doomsbury's creator, become aware and become involved?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Never met him.
Really?
No, I can't even get in touch with him. I tried. No. He just...
Gee.
It's interesting because 20 years ago, when Zonker Harris, the last accessway to open up in Malibu, was opened after a similar struggle, there was a Doonesbury cartoon at that time. But out of a clear blue sky in August of 2002, Mr. Trudeau actually launched in for about 2 weeks of a story about our accessway. And I tried to be very open and kind and judicious and smart and legally correct when dealing with Mr. Geffen in public, but Mr. Trudeau knew no such boundaries. And what actually happened was, was a little strong, but very funny and right on the money, and tickled me pink inside, but scared me pretty much outside, because Mr. Geffen is an extremely powerful man, if nothing else. And he does have $3.9 billion.
$3.9 billion.
And he is probably the greatest philanthropist currently operating in the United States. I line up with him on most issues. He's a good liberal guy, and that's the way I like to think of myself. And he actually made the largest single unrestricted philanthropic gift in the history of the United States, $200 million to UCLA. But on this one, he's got it wrong. And so gently, we'd like to pull him on. Now, he has done the right thing. He has handed over the keys to the gates and allowed us to open and operate this accessway. But unfortunately, it ain't over yet.
No?
No, not really.
Do tell.
Well, we're trying to basically find a way of living together with the homeowners on Carbon Beach, of which one is Mr. Geffen, of course. And I do have 4 staff people who are gently, directing the public to where they may and may not be. And we have homeowners who are storming up and down the beach and roaming in packs and trying to basically, make the public actually feel, quite frankly, that they shouldn't be there. It's a hard birth for the homeowners in this situation, and it's a very difficult one to actually go from what was de facto silent and private to, quite frankly, what it should be, open and public. Now, I have the greatest and the respect and confidence in the public and the people in the state of California. We inevitably have some problems in these situations, but they usually come from the homeowners. And that's what we're going through right now. I'm down on the accessway on Sundays, and we do have some problems, and we have homeowners.
Like what kind of problems?
Well, homeowners, I received a phone call from a homeowner last Saturday who told me there were 18 kids of color in front of his house, and didn't have a problem with that. He did have a problem with them actually being rowdy and making lewd gestures. And he said that they left tons of litter in front of his house that he had to go and put up one by one. So I said I'd take care of it, and I talked to my staff person who said this was absolutely not the case. Sure, they were a little rowdy, they were having a good time. They were going swimming, and they were really, quite frankly, having fun. And they took every single piece of litter and they put it into my trash bin, and there really wasn't a problem there at all. But when you look out of your picture window and you see the ocean straight away, and then you turn around and then you look out of your picture window and you see, the public, it can actually be a tough transition for these people, and that's what we're having to deal with.
Well, we wish them the best, but other than that, in terms of getting over that problem, but you're not seeing the problems that they anticipated, the parking issues or drownings or No. On Broad Beach, which is a very similar beach, there have been 2 open vertical access ways, open for 20 years. No problems with parking, no problems with restrooms, no public safety, nobody on Danny DeVito's terrace, none of that happening. And are you saying that the homeowners occasionally lie about these problems?
I think they exaggerate. I think it's kind of a raw situation to a certain extent. And I can sympathize with them because I live adjacent to public land in Topanga Canyon. And the public wants to go to the state park. And the thing is, it's a question when you walk out on your back deck for 20 years and you basically, see something that really probably isn't really yours. But, you're kind of letting yourself think about it like that. And it's hard to be brought back to reality and realize that it's not yours. It actually belongs to the people, and they would really like to be able to get there. So I don't think they lie. I do think that this is a tough transition for them. And I do think they may exaggerate from time to time to actually make a better case. I had Mayor Richard Reardon actually up the easement last Sunday. Mr. Reardon had quite a few bits of advice for us.
Really? Like?
Well, I did actually say on 4 occasions, I don't think you've got it quite right there, Mr. Mayor. An understanding of the law in this situation for any homeowner on the beach is essentially takes into consideration the mean high tide line, which is actually the back end of a lot of these people's property. The mean high tide line is the average of the 2 high tides on any given day.
That's really complex, you know.
Well, actually, it's pretty simple in the way the courts have translated it. The complex situation is that it's the average of the 2 high tides averaged over the lunar cycle. That means 18 years worth of average high tides of 18 years of different days. That's when the State Lands Commission, the only entity that actually can measure the mean high tide line, actually measures it. They actually look at that sort of span. But the way the courts translate it is far easier. It's the state tidelands. It's the average of the 2 high tides, and in California we have 2 high tides and 2 low tides that are irregular every single day. That means they're different. So it's the average of the 2 high tides. So basically it translates for the courts as the wet sand, as the sand that has been wet in the last 24 hours over the 2 high tides. In the state of Massachusetts, in the state of Maine, it's the mean low tide line, which means that homeowners can actually own out into the water. They've actually found a way past that on Cape Cod by actually declaring a national seashore, but that's a different story. Anyway, the mean high tide line and the wet sand situation is a tough one for the homeowners to get because it's a moving line. It's ambulatory. That's the actual phraseology in the actual Constitution. And the idea that, you know, some days it can be right next to your deck and some days it can be 30 feet away is kind of a tough one. But that's the law. And Mr. Reardon didn't quite understand that one. He thought it was the mean tide line, which is the average of the high and the low tide. Not the average of the 2 high tides.
Mean high tide line.
He also felt that, you know, quite frankly, there were ways we could better manage the access way.
Now you're involved in other issues besides just public access to the beaches in Malibu.
Too many.
Okay. Tell us about Hollister Ranch.
Hollister Ranch. Well, yes, that's interesting. Along the coast in Santa Barbara, where there are huge development pressures, there is a stretch of land to the west of Gaviota State Park called the Hollister Ranch, which is one of the oldest, if not, well, actually, it's the last one, I believe, certainly in that neck of the woods, to actually go over into a private ownership situation. It was held as one piece by the Hollister family until the early 60s.
As a ranch.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Next to it is another ranch called Bixby, which is actually a different type of ownership situation. And on the coast up coast from there is Point Conception and Vandenberg Air Force Base. So when you're actually driving up the 101, you take a right turn at Gaviota, and that's because of Hollister Ranch, Bixby Ranch, and Vandenberg Air Force Base.
I wondered about that, actually. And you go through that tunnel, and then you're inland for quite a way.
That's right. You actually take that right turn. I mean, if you actually did what the railway does, you would actually go through Hollister Ranch by the coast. There are 7 of the most beautiful beaches in the state of California within the boundaries of Hollister Ranch. Hollister Ranch has 140 100-acre private parcels that are actually all for sale. Well, they're not all for sale. 25% of them are actually owned, but 75% of them are actually for sale at this moment in time. There is one road that goes through Hollister Ranch. It is actually a private road, and smack dab in the middle of Hollister Ranch, off that private road, there is an offer to dedicate easement. The YMCA wanted to build a summer camp and actually made an offer to dedicate an easement, and it's still on the books, actually. The summer camp was barely initiated construction, and then they basically sold out to the Hollister Ranch Owners Association. But I'd like to open up access to Hollister Ranch because I don't think any part of the state of California should be inaccessible. However, there are certain parameters because Hollister is a pretty pristine, beautiful piece of land. There's a caveat to that. The homeowners do actually claim the environmental high ground and don't want to see the hordes from LA invading, and that's a direct quote. And yet they drive on the beaches amongst the wrack, scattering the animals here and there. They seem to actually think, quite frankly, that they can do with it what they please. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see something else there. There is $1 million in the county of Santa Barbara, specifically sequestered from oil leases, particularly for access to Hollister Ranch.
Really?
I want that $1 million. And I would like to actually lay a program down which would have state park rangers taking people onto the ranch on a permit basis, a la the wilderness permits for the Grand Canyon, for example, on a day basis, taking them on coaches down into the ranch, using that opportunity to do some public education about the different species and the habitat and how we protect it, and basically allowing them to go onto the ranch for the day and then taking them off at the end of the day. And I'd like to go to the Hollister Ranch Owners Association and put that idea to them. And the reason I'd like to do that is because I actually think that the more the public becomes aware and becomes proud of places like Hollister Ranch, the more that we actually look at the possibility of doing something that the owners object to, which means putting a national seashore there on Gaviota, the more we actually look at extending the ownership of public land in that area, the more we can stop that area being lost to development.
Right.
Because that's what's happening in California.
Of course.
Millions of people coming here, all wanting their own private homes, all gobbling up bits of our wilderness. And if we can find ways of actually introducing the public in a gentle fashion to these things, developing a sense of ownership, a sense of public awareness, if we can actually get the federal government to understand why we should actually have this last pristine bit of California protected with a national seashore status, if we can work to get the Vandenberg Air Force Base folks to basically, when they abandon that base, as they inevitably will, to actually get that into a national park situation, then we could really, save one chunk of California and keep it as beautiful as we possibly can. I have no objection to the folks who actually have purchased and own places in Hollister Ranch, but they have a feverish objection to anybody else actually coming in there and accessing.
Well, I think you're the man to make this happen.
Well, I mean, what we're doing is we're looking at a consortium of environmental organizations in Santa Barbara, including Coast Walk, including Surfrider Foundation Santa Barbara chapter. I pitched them on this idea, and I got their blessing for limited access to Hollister. I think we want to actually basically look at the environmental movement, looking at the way of understanding how to promote the co-ownership of public and private land. I think that's actually the key to a lot of these issues.
So it's not one or the other.
Well, it's a question that,
I mean that's granted by the Constitution, that the wet sand is the public's, but this whole issue of the access is kind of the thorn.
Oh, I'd like to back up one stage to getting a little bit more theoretical, if you'll indulge me, just to go to the idea of what means public and what means private. The whole idea of private property and public property. Now, in this country, we are the most gifted country I've ever seen with regard to public lands. We have the most beautiful, and I am so proud of these great national state parks. And it's a question that I actually think as an environmentalist to actually bring the public's awareness to how much that is part of their identity, to actually build that sense that I am who I am my home, I am my family, I am my national and state parks. This is part of who I am as an American. I actually think the state tidelands in California are a very important part of that, to understand that the beach and the interface and the tidelands are really something that we all own, because the sense of common ownership of both mountain and beach, I believe, will eventually bring about a sense of protection of our own interests and of the land itself. I think to actually bring about in the public the knowledge that this is part of their identity is the key to bringing them on as somebody or people who will put the environment higher up the list than they do currently.
Do you have ideas about how to nourish coastal activism? You know, the truth of the matter, as you know, is that we have millions of people who enjoy going to the beach, and a handful of people who are really willing to, fight for it. But as you also know, it's an expensive proposition, you know, to be engaged in those kind of. How do we nurture and develop and support more activism?
Several ways. First of all, we want to fight for more public money to actually purchase land. That is absolutely imperative. We've had several great bond issues. We purchased a lot of property. We purchased conservation easements on a lot of property, which will actually keep that in the public trust. That's great. We need more, much, much more. Because the coast is, quite frankly, pretty expensive. In Malibu, it's approximately $1 million an acre for raw land.
$1 million an acre.
Before you even go for permits and even start to build, that's right. And every inch of it is lusted after by the general public and people who can afford it. And it's in our interest as state citizens to actually understand that we have to basically get a hold of that. It's really important. It's an asset, and the adjacent lands, and certainly the habitat in terms of the coastal ecosystem is terribly, terribly important. Second way is actually supporting good LCPs, local coastal programs. The Coastal Act basically has a second generation of understanding. From the Coastal Commission, we actually get an individual area will put on its own LCP, its own local coastal program, which will interpret the Coastal Act and which will safeguard the habitat and the general coastal area from outrageous or difficult or threatening development. It doesn't forbid development, but it makes it pretty difficult. I'm a strong supporter of the particular coastal program that's actually in the city of Malibu, which is a strong one. It's very difficult to develop in Malibu, and I think that's great. Because I think that, quite frankly, if we cannot develop in balance with our ever-diminishing habitat, then we really will actually lose this situation very, very quickly. So supporting local coastal programs. County of Los Angeles LCP is coming up, and there will be public meetings. I'd really like to see some folks there understanding the land use issues and actually speaking to them. Fighting for legislators who will actually promote the coast and actually fight these particular battles. I'm a firm believer in the organizations which actually talk to legislators and make sure that they actually vote the right way for the coast. And I'm a strong supporter of the Democrats, and quite frankly, the Democrats have always, well, maybe not always, but quite frequently been pretty good about the coast, and within parameters. Other ways, yeah, I think that to a certain extent, well, yeah, that's just about it, really.
It's been great to have you with us, Steve, and thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Your work on behalf of the coast.
Thanks a lot.